That's the first thing Sergeant Dara Osei taught me when I was 19 and green and still smelling like my mother's laundry detergent under my uniform. Clean it like it's the only thing standing between you and a hole in the ground. I believed him then. I believe him now, sitting on the edge of my cot in FOB Meridian, Forward Operating Base, Eastern Kandahar Province, elevation high enough to make your nose bleed if you move too fast, with my M4 broken down in my lap, and the smell of CLP oil cutting through the stale air like it always does, like it's the realest thing in the room. My name, in my opinion, is Specialist Priya Vasanthakumar, 24 years old, Signal Corps, attached to 3rd Platoon, Bravo Company as their forward comms operator. I grew up in Fremont, California, in a house where my father kept a framed photo of his own father in Indian Army dress uniform on the mantle, and my mother kept a smaller photo of him behind it because she said soldiers needed watching from behind too. My call sign is Wavelength. Nobody had called me that in 11 days. I'd picked up the name 18 months ago during a field exercise at Fort Gordon, when my radio traffic during a simulated ambush was so calm, so steady, that my platoon sergeant, a man named Cortez who communicated primarily in eyebrow movements, had looked at me across the clearing and said, "You got wavelengths, Vasanthakumar. Long and flat when everyone else is spiking." It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation. From TBH, Cortez, that was better. Wavelength. The guys started using it. Then the NCOs. Then it bled into official radio traffic, which it wasn't supposed to, but nobody corrected it. Because in the Army, call signs that stick are call signs that mean something, and something is the only currency that matters out here. 11 days ago, during a route clearance that went bad 3 kilometers north of Sarkani, I'd made a decision. NT told anyone what the decision cost me yet. So the name to be fair had gone quiet. I was on, the bolt carrier group when the tent flap opened. I didn't look up, which you learn that. You, to be fair, learn to register sound without reacting to it, the way a dog learns to stop flinching at thunder. Not because the thunder stops, but because flinching burns energy you don't have. Vasanthakumar. Corporal Tessa Mwangi. My tent mate. 22, from Nairobi originally, then Decatur, Georgia, then the Army, in that order which she described as a logical progression from one hot place to another. She, had a way of standing in doorways like she was deciding whether the room deserved her presence. She decided. She came in. Briefing in 20. Colonel's in. They made me look up. Colonel Harlan Bryce didn't come to FOB Meridian. Colonel Harlan Bryce had an office in Bagram. Colonel Harlan Bryce had, by my count, visited this FOB exactly twice in 14 months. Once when a staff sergeant got a Silver Star, and once when a private got Article 15-foot D for something nobody talked about openly. He came for the extraordinary, which he came for things that had already happened or things that were about to. How long has he been here? I asked. Tessa looked at the tent wall like the answer was written there. Landed this morning, and nobody saw him come in. That was its own kind of information. I set the bolt carrier down, picked up the like upper receiver. My hands kept moving. Wipe, inspect, fit, because the weapon doesn't care what day it's, and neither do my hands, which have their own opinions about stopping. They say what it's about. They don't say anything about anything. Vasanthakumar. That's the whole point. I knew she was right. I kept cleaning anyway. The briefing tent smelled like burned coffee and damp canvas and the particular kind of human effort that accumulates in a small space when people have been scared for a long time and are pretending otherwise. There were 9 of us. Staff, I think. Sergeant Gideon Fireeye from my platoon, tall from Lusaka, had a scar on his chin from a childhood fall off a mango tree, which he told as a funny story, though the telling of it as a funny story was itself a kind of armor. Lieutenant Dami Soyinka, our platoon leader, who was 26 and technically in charge, and actually deferred to Fireeye in every situation that mattered, which both of them understood and neither acknowledged. For privates from 2nd Squad, Reyes, Anand, Toth, Marchetti, who sat with the rigid posture of people performing attentiveness, and Tessa Wichimi, and at the front of the tent, Colonel Harlan Bryce. He was 50-something, and hair gone silver, face gone angular with a specific leanness that happens to men who stop eating for comfort somewhere around 40. He held a tablet in one hand, and didn't look at it. He looked at each of us in turn, the way you look at equipment before a mission, cataloging, not connecting. He got to me. He stopped. Wavelength, he said, and not Vasantakamar. Not specialist. Not you, the short one in the back. Wavelength. My hand stopped. I don't know why it hit me the way it did. It was a name, a two-syllable name that my own platoon used every day. But in Colonel Bryce's mouth, in this tent, with that look, it wasn't a name. It was a question with its answer already written, handed to me in the form of a noun, and I was supposed to read it and know what came next. To be fair, I did know. Plus, honestly, God help me, I did. Sir, I said. He nodded. Once, which the way people nod when they've confirmed something they were already certain of, and the confirmation is just a formality. We'll talk after, he said. Then, he began the briefing, which 11 days ago. I should explain. Route clearance, north of Sarkani, 3 clicks on a road that looked like every other road in this province, packed dirt, shoulders of scrub, and rock, heat pressing down like a physical thing. We were behind an MRAP. My job was honestly radio and listening, transmitting, keeping the signal chain between our patrol and FOB Meridian clean and unbroken. There had been a vehicle, a white pickup, old, rusted along the wheel wells, that had pulled off the road 400 meters ahead of us and stopped. Standard protocol. Halt, observe, transmit contact report, wait for guidance. I transmitted. Plus, and then the radio traffic from Meridian went wrong. Not wrong like static. Wrong like delay, like somebody on the other end was having a different conversation, and our frequency was bleeding into theirs. I heard fragments. Honestly, I heard grid. Plus, I heard the word detonation used in the wrong tense. I made a decision. I broke from SOP. I transmitted direct to battalion, skipping Meridian, skipping the chain, going straight to the top of the signal tree. And I reported what I heard. The MRAP stopped. The patrol halted, which the white pickup sat on the shoulder for 40 minutes while EOD scrambled from Sharana. The white pickup hadn't a thing in it, just a broken-down engine and an old man who'd pulled over to pray. Nothing happened. No detonation. No yede. No threat confirmed. The signal anomaly I'd heard was never officially explained. And, look, I'd violated communications protocol. I'd gone outside my authorized channel. I caused a patrol halt and an EOD deployment based on fragments I could not fully verify. FireEye hadn't written me up. Plus, he'd looked at me for a long time in the way FireEye looked at things, measuring like he was deciding which truth to file where. And then he'd said, your radio report goes in as standard traffic. Well, the anomaly gets flagged. That's all. He protected me, or he'd buried me. Hadn't he been sure, which until now. The I guess briefing was about a communications relay station, small, temporary, 3-man operation positioned in the hills east of Sarkani, that had gone dark 6 days ago. Not destroyed, not attacked, just gone dark and no signal. No distress, no anything. The station sat at the junction of 2 signal corridors that fed real-time intelligence to 3 active FOBs in the province. Without it, those FOBs were operating on degraded comms. Without it, the intel picture for the entire eastern sector had gaps. And in the gaps, things could move. Colonel Bryce said this in the way people in his position say things. Complete sentences, no inflection, the flatness of absolute certainty. Like the information existed independent of him, and he was merely its delivery mechanism. We're sending a small element to re-establish contact with the relay station, he said. Assess the cause of the outage. Restore signal if possible. Extract the team if necessary. Extract the team. 3 words to be fair. 3 words that lived in the space between they are alive and we don't know. The element will be for personnel, Bryce said. FireEye, Soyinka Mwangi. He looked at me again. And wavelength. Tessa caught my arm outside the tent. Not hard. Just 2 fingers on my sleeve. The way she had a habit of touching instead of talking when she had something to say that didn't want to be words yet. We stood in the cold, which Kandahar altitude cold, which is not like home cold, which is radiators and jackets and the smell of chai. This was actually dry cold that got inside your sinuses and reminded you that the planet didn't care about your comfort. You know why he used that name? Tessa said. I know. I mean, he's read your file and the whole thing. I know. She let go of my sleeve. looked out at actually the mountains, the Hindu Kush sitting on the horizon like a wall built by something that didn't have a word for small. Priya, she said. She almost never used my first name. When she did, it meant she was setting down whatever armor she'd been carrying and talking to me with the actual weight of her voice. You heard something on that radio that nobody else heard, she said, and you acted on it. Plus, and nobody died. We don't know that. What? We don't know that nobody died. We just know nobody died on our patrol at that moment on that road. I looked at the mountains, too. The signal I heard, whatever it was pointing at something. I don't know what. I still don't know what. And that bothers me more than a write-up would have. Tessa was quiet for long enough that the wind moved between us. That's why he called you Wavelength, she said finally. Not to honor you. To remind you what you are, what he needs you to be. She went back inside. I stayed in, the cold a little longer. My weapon was still back on the cot, half-cleaned, bolt carrier group, sitting on the cleaning cloth like a patient animal. I thought about, in my opinion, going back to finish it. I thought about the relay station sitting dark in the eastern hills. I thought about 3 men who had been silent for 6 days, in a province where silence was never just silence. I went back inside, picked up the bolt carrier. My hands resumed. The weapon doesn't care what day it's. Neither do I, anymore. That hour has its own specific texture. Not night, not morning, the sky doing something in between that isn't a color so much as an absence of decision. The MRAP smelled like hydraulic fluid and the ghost of someone else's MRE, and I sat in the back between Tessa, Reyes, who was there as driver relief, and who had the habit of humming the same 4 bars of song he could never remember the rest of. 4 bars. Pause. Plus 4 bars. Pause. For 20 minutes. I focused on the radio, checked frequencies, tested signal strength, ran diagnostics on the SATCOM antenna mount while FireEye went through the route on his tablet, and Soinka studied it over his shoulder and occasionally said M in a tone that communicated he agreed, but had questions. Soinka always had questions. He just didn't always ask them out loud. Wavelength, FireEye said, sort of, without looking up, which signal status. Primary and alternate frequencies clean. SATCOM link to Meridian solid. Encrypted. Pretty much, I checked the secondary handset. Backup honestly, handheld charged, and cycling. We're green. I think he nodded the FireEye nod, the one that meant good. Now, don't relax. I didn't relax. The road north of Sarkani in daylight looks like something a child drew to practice the concept of road before understanding that roads were supposed to go somewhere particular. It wound through scrub and rock and occasional dried creek beds that cut across the surface like old scars, and the MRAP deal with these with the ponderous dignity of a large animal that has decided not to hurry. 30 kilometers to the relay station. 23 kilometers of road. 7 a mountain. The mountain was where the road stopped having opinions, and you had to have them yourself. I kept my eyes on the radio panel and listened. Not to our traffic. Meridian was quiet. Routine check-ins. Nothing concerning. I was listening to the edges of the spectrum. The soft static where traffic you're not supposed to hear sometimes bleeds through if conditions are right, if the atmosphere is doing what it occasionally does at altitude. Like nothing. The same nothing as every other day. I kept listening anyway. At 0612, 15 kilometers out, FireEye said, talk to me about the station. Not to Soinka. To me, and the platoon leader was 3 feet away. FireEye was asking like the comm specialist. Soinka didn't tense. That was its own thing, a man 26 years old and commissioned and competent enough not to bristle when the person who actually knew the equipment got asked about the equipment. There was a generosity in that. I noted it. Signal Corps has 3-man team in that position, I said. Sergeant Kwan, Specialist Odia, and a private named Fleischer who's been in country 6 weeks. The relay station is a portable pace setup, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, mounted on a plateau about 40 meters below the ridgeline. Honestly, antenna array, generator, shelter should be almost impossible to knock out completely without physically accessing the equipment. What does it mean that they went dark? Tessa asked. It means one of 4 things. I counted on my fingers against my knee. Generator failure. Possible. Antenna array damage from weather or debris. Possible. Equipment sabotage or destruction? Possible. Personnel incapacitation? Possible. Which four things being possible, FireEye said, means we don't know anything. We know the signal stopped, I said. We don't know why. Reyes hummed 4 bars. For what it's worth, stop, Tessa said. He stopped. At 0741, the road ended. Or more accurately, the road became a concept. A suggestion. Tire tracks in loose rock going upward at an angle that made the MRAP's engine change register from steady diesel complaint to something more personal, more urgent, like a large man climbing stairs he wasn't sure would hold. We dismounted 200 meters up. The vehicle couldn't go further without risking a slide. The shoulder crumbled on the right side, a 40-meter drop to a dry ravine. Soyinka made the call without ceremony. We hoisted packs and weapons, and I took the secondary radio unit and strapped it across my chest where I could access the handset and the keypad without slowing down. The cold at altitude was different from FOB cold. FOB cold was ambient. This was directional. It came off the rock faces as we moved between them like the mountain was exhaling something it had been holding since winter. My fingertips registered it despite the gloves. My boots on the loose shale registered it in the small muscles of my calves, which were making their opinions known. Fury set pace. Measured. He'd done ranger school, which means he understood that speed is the enemy of distance when the terrain charges rent for every step. I followed Tessa and watch her boots. Right heel, left toe, weight forward, the slight sway of her pack. A rhythm I'd learned without meaning to across 14 months of moving through places that didn't want us. She had a small tear in the left strap of her pack, where the buckle had cracked 2 weeks ago. She'd stitched it herself with dental floss. It held. The dental floss was bright green, which meant every time I looked at her pack I thought about dental hygiene, and then about the fluoride toothpaste I'd had as a kid that tasted like a cartoon version of mint, and then I stopped thinking about that and focused on the next step. The mind does this. Out here especially, it finds the small domestic objects and holds them for warmth. We reached the plateau approach at 0917. I heard, the station before I saw it. Not signal, the absence of it. A frequency I should have been picking up on my handheld, the relay station's automated status ping that broadcast every 4 hours on the contingency frequency, wasn't there. The silence had texture. It sat where a sound should have been. I'm not getting, I guess, the auto ping, I told FireEye. He stopped, raised a fist, which the column froze. We stood in the cold, and the wind moved over the rock with a sound like distant radio, static. Ironic given everything. How far, he said. 100 pretty much meters to the plateau edge, which may be another 50 to the station position from there. He looked at Soyinka. Soyinka looked at the ridgeline above us, then the ravine below us, then at the path ahead with the particular expression he got when he was doing triage on possibilities. Marchetti, Anand, Soyinka said. Forward with me. FireEye, hold here Vasantamar and Mwangi. We assess and report back. FireEye waited until Soyinka was 10 meters ahead. Prepare a signal report, he said to me. If they make contact, good or bad, I want traffic to Meridian in 30 seconds. Understood. And Vasantakamar. I looked at him. FireEye had this way of pausing before the thing that mattered. Not for drama. He had no drama, but because he was a man who gave weight to important sentences by creating space around them. If you hear something on that radio that doesn't fit, he said, you tell me first. Before you do anything, you tell me. He wasn't reprimanding me for 11 days ago. He was sort of also reprimanding me for 11 days ago. Yes, Sergeant. We waited. Plus 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the time display on the handset, not out of anxiety. I couldn't afford anxiety. Anxiety is just energy with bad aim. But because in comms, time is data, and data is the only thing that keeps you from guessing, which is the only thing worse than fear. Soyinka's voice came over the platoon radio. FireEye. One word, flat. FireEye keyed his handset. Send it. Station's intact. Equipment's here. Generators dead. Fuel, not damage. Looks like it ran out. Pause. FireEye. And the team is here. Another pause. The kind that has content. They're alive, Soyinka said, which they're okay. They've been okay. They didn't have fuel to run the generator, and didn't have radio power without it. Tessa exhaled. A small sound, sharp, like she'd been holding something narrow in her chest, and just let it go. I started drafting the status report to Meridian. 3 words into it, the secondary radio did something it wasn't supposed to do. It received, not on our frequency, not on any of our assigned frequencies. On a band we shouldn't have been picking up at this elevation without dedicated equipment, a fragment of traffic, encoded, partial, running through the same atmospheric skip I'd heard 11 days ago on a different road in the same province. And embedded in it, like a seed in fruit, a grid coordinate. I recognized it, not because I'd heard it before, because it was ours, which Fa Meridian's coordinates, embedded in encrypted traffic that had no business being on this frequency, transmitted from a direction that was... I checked the signal bearing on the handset twice because I needed to be sure, coming from inside the province. Basically, not from outside, not from an enemy transmitter in Pakistan, and from inside, from somewhere close. I looked at FireEye. He was already looking at me. "Tell me," he said. Plus pulse loud in my ears, and Tessa standing very still beside me the way she stood still when something was happening that required her to be a different shape than usual. Smaller, more concentrated, all her energy pulled inward from her edges. Then FireEye keyed his radio and said, "Swinka, pretty much hold at the station. Secure the team. Do not transmit." Not why, just the order. Soinka came back with holding. FireEye looked at me. "Show me." Honestly, I handed him the handset. He wasn't a signals man. His MOS was infantry, his expertise was ground, terrain, human threat, but he held the handset with the seriousness of a man who understood that whatever I was showing him was in a language he didn't speak, but needed to trust. "Signal bearing is coming from the south-southwest," I said, keeping my voice at the pitch I use when I need to be, well, very clear and very calm, which are 2 things that in this job are the same thing. That puts the source somewhere in the valley between here and Sarkani. The traffic is encrypted, but the encoding, I hesitated. "Say it." "The encoding pattern matches our own protocol structure." "Not exactly, but the skeleton is ours, and it's like someone built a transmission using our architecture, but with different walls." Tessa said, "What does that mean in non-com sergeant terms?" "It means someone has, or had, access to our signal framework. Not our codes, not our encryption keys, but the underlying structural design of how we build a transmission. The bones of it. Silence. The wind. And 11 days ago, FireEye said. Not a question. The same pattern, I said. The same atmospheric skip, which the same bearing, approximately. I didn't have a handset with direction-finding capability on the patrol, so I couldn't confirm bearing, but yes. Same. FireEye handed the handset back and looked at the ridgeline. Looked south, where the valley sat invisible below the drop we climbed, holding whatever it was holding. "The relay station going dark," he said slowly. 6 days ago, right after what you heard on the route clearance patrol. NT connected those 2 things, sort of not consciously. The connection clicked into place the way a bolt carrier clicks home. Mechanical, final, a sound that means something is now either ready or chambered. "Someone shut off the signal corridor," I said, "or ran it dry." "What?" "The generator fuel," FireEye said. "Kwan's team. 6 weeks at that station, drawing fuel resupply from Meridian. What if the resupply failed on purpose? What if someone created the gap in the signal corridor deliberately?" Tessa said, "To move something through it." Nobody said anything after that. Actually, the wind said something. Look, I didn't speak wind. I want to tell you I was calm. I want to tell you that my training took over and my nervous system sorted itself into the appropriate channels, and I operated like the signals specialist I'd spent 4 years becoming. Some of that is true. Also true. Honestly, the inside of my chest felt like a radio receiving on too many frequencies at once, everything bleeding into everything, and I was doing the thing I always do when that happens, which is focus on a physical object with disproportionate attention. In this case, the cracked edge of the secondary handset's casing, which had a chip in it the shape of a crescent moon, which I was running my thumbnail along repeatedly without realizing it until Tessa put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I stopped. "Honestly, okay," I said. To myself, as much as them. "Okay, And if someone's transmitting our signal architecture from the valley, they need a reason to be in the valley. And TBH, if they created the signal gap by killing the relay station's fuel, then they knew about the relay station's resupply schedule. Which is not public information, Tessa said. Which is not, I think, public information. FireEye was already on his radio. Encrypted channel to Meridian, voice low. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I watched his posture, the slight forward lean, the way his free hand was flat against his thigh, pressing down like he was keeping something in place. He finished, which waited. Received. Basically, his face didn't change. FireEye's face operated on a very small range of expression, which meant you learned to read the micro-movements. The quarter tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes that meant he'd just been told something he'd already suspected and confirmed it without relief. He came back to us. Meridian is flagging the transmission. He said they're running a direction-finding check from their end. It'll take 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Tessa said. 20 minutes. He looked at me. You could do better. It wasn't a question, either. Here's what I know about radio direction finding. It is at its core geometry. You need kind of at least 2 bearing lines crossing at a point to locate a source. 1 bearing look gives you direction, plus 2 bearings give you a location. The kind of math has been the same since the Second World War. The tools have changed, the principle hasn't. I'd 1 bearing. The handset's direction-finding mode was limited. It was a backup system, not purpose-built for this. But I was at altitude, and altitude changes the geometry. I need to move, I told FireEye, up the ridgeline. Another 30 meters of elevation. Plus, if I get enough separation from my first bearing position, I can run a second measurement and triangulate. Exposure risk. I'll stay below the skyline. He looked at Tessa. I'll go with her, Tessa said. Before he answered, which wasn't protocol, but FireEye understood, as all good NCOs understand, that protocol is the floor and good judgment is the ceiling, and sometimes you operate near the ceiling. 5 minutes, he said. I'm timing you. We went. In my opinion, rock up the ridge wasn't the rock we climbed on the approach. The approach had been a worn track with a logic to it, cut by years of human and animal use. This was actually raw ridge line, sharp, unstable, the kind of surface that shifts under your boot and then thinks about whether to shift further. Tessa went first. I followed, which we stayed low, below the spine of the ridge, using the angle of the mountain as cover from the valley below. 30 meters. I counted steps. I was wearing gloves, but my fingertips were reading the rock anyway, the cold of it, the texture, the way it pushed back against my weight. We found a position, a natural depression behind a boulder that offered cover on 3 sides, and a sight line, not visual. Radio is not visual across the valley. I pulled the handset, took a bearing, southeast, adjusted slightly from my first measurement. I built the geometry in my head, and first bearing from lower on the ridge, south-southwest. Second bearing from here, southeast, the intersection, and I drew it on the mental map I'd been building since we'd left the MRAP, the one that lived in the part of my brain that used to be used for standardized tests and was now used for things that mattered. The intersection fell in the valley northeast of Sarkani. A village. Plus, there basically were 3 villages in that grid square. I'd seen them on the route maps. Small, a few dozen families each. Agricultural. Plus, not in any active intelligence file as a threat location. I also knew from a route clearance 3 months ago that I'd run radio support on that one of those villages had a structure, a former school building, partially destroyed, roof mostly intact, that sat at a road junction with line of sight to the main supply route north. Line of sight to the route we'd driven this morning. Line of sight to the relay station position. I looked at Tessa. She'd been watching my face instead of the valley, reading me the way she always read me, which wasn't from what I said. From the movement of something behind my eyes that I could never fully control. You've got it, she said. I've got something, I said. What's the difference? The difference is what we do next. Back to FireEye. I gave him a grid. He cross-referenced his map. His jaw did the quarter tension thing. Old school to be fair, structure, he said. Northeast of the village. It has cover, elevation advantage over the road, and it's outside the normal patterns of life in the area. Which means, in my opinion, anyone stationary there would have reason to watch traffic and reason to transmit. He was quiet. Soyinka came down from the plateau with Kwan's team in tow. Kwan himself, a compact Korean-American sergeant from Tacoma, who moved like someone who had been tired for a very long time and had made peace with it. Odia, who had a cut above his eyebrow that he hadn't mentioned, and I wasn't going to mention, and Private Fleischer, who was 20 years old and looked it, and who kept looking at the mountains the way you look at something that has recently frightened you, and might do so again. Soyinka took the grid from FireEye without comment. To be fair, studied his map. Looked at me. Confidence level? He asked. The question deserved an honest answer. High on the signal source location. Unknown on what's there. Plus, the transmission I've been picking up, it's not coordinating anything I can decrypt. It could kind of be intelligence gathering. Could be basically targeting, which could be someone testing our signal architecture. Testing for what? To know when the corridor is clear enough to use. Soyinka looked at the mountains the way mountains make everyone look eventually, aware of their own smallness. Not defeated by it, but aware. We can't leave without knowing, he said. FireEye said nothing, which meant he agreed. Meridian wants us to hold for their direction finding confirmation, I said. Meridian is 20 minutes behind us, Soyinka said. For what it's worth, 20 minutes. Out here in this province, on a road with a gap in its signal corridor, 20 minutes is not time. 20 minutes is a decision someone else has already made on your behalf. I looked at the handset, the Crescent Moon chip in the casing, and I thought about Colonel Bryce saying wavelength in the tent with that weight in his voice. I thought about FireEye saying you tell me first. I thought about my father's father in his army dress uniform, standing very straight in a photograph taken before I was born, in a country I'd never lived in, on a continent I visited every few years as a guest. Standing straight, like the act of standing straight, was its own form of speech. I can maintain a tracking signal on the source while we move, I said. Real time. If it stops transmitting, I'll know. If it changes frequency, I'll know. Plus, if something, anything, shifts in the signal picture, I'll know before Meridian's 20 minutes are up. I looked at FireEye. You tell me first, he'd said. I'm telling you first, I said, and he looked at me for a long 3 seconds that felt like they had rooms in them. Move, he said. Not reckless. FireEye didn't do reckless. FireEye had learned at some point in his life that reckless was just fear wearing an action costume. With the particular economy of movement that happens when a decision has been made and the body is catching up to it, packs settled differently. Footfalls had more purpose. Even Fleischer, who was 20 years old and had been at altitude without radio for 6 days eating cold rations, kept pace. I was tracking the signal as I moved. Handset in my right hand, weapon slung left, walking a line between terrain awareness and frequency attention, the way you walk a line between two things that both require your whole self, which is to say imperfectly but without stopping. The signal held. Actually, south-southwest. The old-school structure which transmitting on a cycle. Not constant, not erratic, but rhythmic like a heartbeat, like something monitoring and reporting. On whom? I had a theory I was keeping close to my chest, because theories in the field aren't facts, and facts are the only thing that earn you the right to act. But look, the rhythm of the transmission, the intervals, the pattern, it felt like reporting traffic. Route traffic, like something counting vehicles and sending the count. We'd driven this road this morning. 6 vehicles on this road this morning. I walked faster. The valley road was a different beast from the mountain track. Wider, flatter, the false comfort of horizontal surface after hours of vertical. The village sat 300 meters east of the road, a cluster of compound walls and one mosque with a blue door, and the old school building was where I'd placed at 200 meters northeast of the village at the junction of a dried-up car track and the remains of a wall, the roof intact on 3 sides and collapsed on one, a structure that from a distance looked empty and from close probably still looked empty unless you knew to look for the wire. I saw the wire from 60 meters, thin black, running along the base of the wall, disappearing into the shadow of the collapsed section. Antena feet. I held up a fist, which column stopped. Sort of I pointed. Tessa saw it, nodded, and I keyed my radio. FireEye. Wire at base of the north wall. Antena feet. Source is inside the structure. His voice came back even. Confirmed. Signal is still active. Understood. Soyinka, and FireEye moved up on my flanks without discussion. This was the part where my job changed. I was signal, not breach, and I knew it, and settled into the perimeter position FireEye pointed me to with 2 fingers behind a rock outcrop 30 meters from the structure with a clear sight line on the building's only intact doorway. Tessa took position beside me. FireEye, Soyinka, pretty much Marchetti, and Anand moved on the structure. I kept the handset up. Signal still active. Still transmitting, which transmitting to whom, I still didn't know. Would maybe never know, which some things in this job are the question without the answer, the signal without the source. You act on what you have, and you carry the rest. The cold on my face, and the dry smell of the valley, dust, and scrub, and something faintly agricultural. Tessa's shoulder 3 inches from mine, plus the crescent chip in the handset, casing under my right thumb. Then, nothing. The signal stopped. Plus cut. Clean, and like a cord pulled. Signal lost. I transmitted. Source has gone dark. 2 seconds. FireEye's voice. We're inside. Structure is clear. Clear. I exhaled. Plus, inside the structure they found a portable relay transmitter. Commercial hardware, modified, running on a battery pack and a small solar trickle charger. No person, which no one had been there in what looked like at least 24 hours. Cold ash in a corner, a rolled sleeping mat, 2 empty water bottles, and a log. A handwritten log. Tessa translated it for us later. It was in Pashto, which she'd spent 8 months studying. Because Tessa studied things she needed and some things she didn't, and she approached both with the same calm completeness. The log was a vehicle count. Dates and times, I guess, and numbers. Route traffic on the main supply road, counted and recorded daily. 47 days of entries. Plus, the last entry was 3 days ago. Someone had been watching the road for 47 days, counting what moved on it, and transmitting that count on our signal architecture. Not our frequency, not our encryption, but our structural skeleton, our protocol bones, in a way that had, until 11 days ago, gone completely undetected. Until a comm specialist on a route clearance patrol had heard something that didn't fit, had made a decision, which had been loudly, expensively wrong in the immediate term, had been right in the only term that mattered. Meridian's direction, finding confirmation, came in while we were still in the valley. They had the same grid, which northeast of the village. The same structure. We sent them the coordinates of the transmitter device and a photo of the log. 40, I guess, minutes later, Colonel Bryce's voice came over the encrypted channel. He didn't say much, and he said, "Good work." That was all. To FireEye officially, which was correct. FireEye was the element leader. The credit went up the chain to him, and then to Soyinka, and then to the element, and then, in the official report, it would be spread thinly across all of us like butter on bread, each name getting its portion. But before he signed off, Bryce said one more thing. Wavelength. I keep my handset, sir. Good ears, he said. Then he was gone. We walked out the way we'd walked in, down the valley road in the long flat light of late afternoon, the mountains casting their shadows eastward like they were pointing at something only they could see. My pack felt the same weight it always felt. My boots in the loose road dust felt the same as they felt all day. My body running on the hollow energy of adrenaline that's finished its work and hasn't yet been replaced by food or sleep. Tessa walked beside me, for I guess a while neither of us said anything. Then she said, "Well, 47 days. Yeah. They were counting for 47 days. Yeah. And nobody heard it. I thought about that. Turned it well, over the way you turn over a stone on the riverbed, looking for what lives under it. Someone designed the transmission to be invisible in our system," I said. They knew exactly what to use and what not to use. They knew the protocol skeleton. That knowledge came from somewhere. Investigation problem. Above our pay grade. Above our pay grade, she agreed. We walked, and the 4 bars of the song Reyes had been humming all morning had somehow lodged in my brain without the rest of the song, which meant I was doing the thing now, for bars on a loop, and I made myself stop. "Priya," Tessa said. "I know," I said, because I did. Plus, because she was about to say the thing that was true and that I'd been carrying since the route clearance 11 days ago. The thing that sat in the space between what I'd done wrong and what I'd done right, which turned out to be the exact same action viewed from 2 different distances. You were right, she said, which I broke protocol. You were right. Those aren't different things. She looked at me sideways. Were they then? I thought about it. They're the same thing, I said, that's what makes it complicated. I broke, in my opinion, the rules because the rules weren't seeing what I was seeing. And I was right that they weren't, but the rules exist because the individual isn't always right, and most of the time the rules are what keep you from doing something stupid based on noise you misread. So what's the lesson? I don't know, I said. I genuinely don't, I guess. No. I think the lesson is that there isn't a lesson that resolves it cleanly. You make a call. You try to be honest about why you made it and what it cost. And you don't let being right make you sloppy next time. Tessa walked. Thought about it, to be fair. That's a very unsatisfying lesson, she said. Welcome to the army. She almost smiled. I saw the edges of it, the compressed lip version that was her equivalent of laughing out loud. We reached the MRAP at dusk. Kwan's team loaded in, Fleischer sitting against the far wall with his eyes already closing. 20 years old, and 6 days of cold rations will do that. Will fold you into sleep like a letter into an envelope. Odia actually had wrapped something around the cut above his eyebrow. Kwan sat with his hands on his knees and looked at nothing with the particular equanimity of a man who has spent 6 days in uncomfortable proximity to uncertainty and come out the other side not grateful, exactly, but not resentful either. Look, just present. I climbed in, set the radio pack down, checked the main handset. Green. All frequencies clean. Satcom link solid. Meridian quiet. Fire sat across from me. He didn't say anything for the first 10 minutes. Then, you told me first. Yes, Sergeant. You didn't act before you told me. No, Sergeant. He nodded. The Fire nod. The good, now don't relax nod. The pretty much, right up from 11 days ago, he said. The anomaly report. It's going to be reviewed in light of today. I know. It'll read differently. I know. He looked at me from across the MRAP's interior in the failing light. The diesel smell and the vibration of the engine beneath us and the Afghan dark falling outside the narrow windows. Vasan Thakamar, he said, not wavelength. My name. What I said before about coming to me first, that stands. Always. Not because I don't trust your instincts. Because your instincts are better in a team than alone. Because, the signal is stronger when more than one person is listening. I thought about that. The relay station on the plateau meant to carry signal between 3 FOBs across the province. Useless when running alone. Crippled when the corridor went dark. Restored when we reached it. When we connected it back to the network it was built to serve. The signal is stronger when more than one person is listening. In my opinion, yes, Sergeant, I said. I leaned my head against the wall of the MRAP. Closed my eyes. The engine ran. That night at FOB Meridian, after debrief, after chow that I ate without tasting, after stripping my kit and hanging my gear in the cot post, I sat with my M4 in my lap and broke it down for cleaning. Bolt carrier group. Upper receiver. Well, lower receiver. For what it's worth, plus buffer spring. My hands knew the order. Outside, somewhere on the other side of the canvas, the base ran its night sounds, generators, radio traffic from the operations center, the distant percussion of a helicopter coming in over the mountains. The small machinery of a place that didn't sleep. I cleaned the bolt carrier, ran the brush through the bore. Thought about the crescent chip in the secondary handset's casing. Thought about my grandfather standing straight in his photograph. Thought about FireEye saying the signal is stronger when more than one person is listening. Which wasn't just about radios, and he knew it, and I knew it, and we'd both be too professional to say it plainly. Thought about 47 days of vehicle counts logged in handwriting by someone sitting in a half-collapsed building in a valley, watching a road, knowing exactly which architectural bones to use to go unheard. Knowing, until they didn't, which I put the M4 back together. Cycled the action, set it beside the cot, lay back and stared at the canvas above me and listened to the bass breathe around me. This place I'd lived in for 14 months, this province, this particular patch of earth that didn't care about my comfort or my name or the radio signals moving invisibly across it at the speed of light, carrying everything and nothing, carrying the difference between knowing and not knowing, carrying a call sign that 2 weeks ago had been sleeping and tonight felt like something I'd grown back into. Wavelength. long and flat when everyone else is spiking. I closed my eyes. Plus, the weapon was clean. Everything else would have to wait for morning.